Jan Logie.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The Green Party will be supporting the Immigration Amendment Bill to Select Committee. There are aspects of this bill that are critically important in concept, and we are very keen to explore the detail of them to ensure that they deliver for the people who need protection. And there are other aspects of this bill that give us pause for concern that we look forward to also rigorously investigating to ensure that they provide New Zealand with the solutions in immigration that we need. This bill, the primary purpose and the flagship of this bill is making the exploitation of migrants on a temporary entry-class visa with work conditions an offence, and makes the employer liable for deportation. Previously, these sections only covered unlawful workers. It will enable employers who exploit workers to be liable for a sentence of up to 7 years in prison and a fine of up to $100,000. And, as mentioned earlier, opens them up to the possible deportation. It's really important to increase penalties because at least one of the reasons for needing to increase them is because up till now the penalties have often been less than the benefits of the exploitation, and that's clearly not going to change the culture. Over the last few years, we've heard of increasing number of examples of exploitation of migrant workers, and I do want to specifically thank First Union for their fine advocacy on this issue and bringing it to all of our attentions. We all lose when workers are exploited. In a case publicised last week, an Auckland-based Korean food preparation factory is alleged to have exploited migrant workers with 16-hour working days, with few or no breaks, below minimum wages and no employment contracts. And a spokesperson for the Union Network of Migrants, Dennis Magger, has noted that this bill needs to be passed as soon as possible because migrants working on their Christchurch rebuild, we know, are already being ill-treated. And as my Labour colleague Darian Fenton has mentioned, there are 12 investigations underway, but only 4 inspectors for what's expected to be 17,000 migrant workers. We need to make sure that we have a system in place to protect our local economies and protect those workers from exploitation. There have been cases which the First Union has mentioned of employees signing agreements in the Philippines, yet when they arrive to New Zealand, that contract and agreement has been changed. And they know of workers whose local employer is threatening to send them home if they don't work during the weekend without pay. That's not good for our international reputation, that's not good for vulnerable people, and that's not going to be good for the quality of the work on the rebuild in Christchurch either. Migrant workers, and especially temporary migrant workers, are vulnerable. Often they have limited knowledge of their rights. Sometimes they find it difficult to communicate and feel their ability to speak up is constrained because they feel, quite rightly, that their immigration status may be at risk. There's been reporting where a migrant worker himself has described some of what he's seen happening up in Auckland, and he talked about just that when migrants arrive here to work, for them work is their top priority because it's going to enable them to survive. But unfortunately, as many of us know, decent and well-paid jobs can be pretty hard to find. So no matter how keen or qualified someone is, and desperate migrants try to save money as hard as they can. And that sometimes that we've heard about people being sold jobs even before they start, which is a very deep form of exploitation. We've also heard stories of people being moved into sheds or garages in cramped, cold conditions as basic as a provision of their conditions of work, and sometimes the money coming off the wages to pay for what are incredibly substandard conditions. And there's also stories of people being paid exorbitant or being asked to pay exorbitant rates for those same below standard conditions. And then we also have heard of people being paid, between $4 and $10 an hour without breaks, without their legal entitlements. So we really clearly need, as a parliament, to address these problems. So I do want to, this bill, point out a few of the concerns that have been raised by the people who are desperate for it to be implemented. And I hope that we can have the discussion around that within Select Committee. That the First Union has suggested that we need to also have stronger requirements on employers at the point of accreditation and tougher penalties for bad practice. So this delivers on the tougher penalties, but I haven't seen the point around accreditation. And they also raised the point, again raised by Labour, about the need for more labour inspectors from the very low levels that we have currently. Because if we're going to ensure that the system that we put in place is able to work, we need to have the people out there making it work and checking for people. And they also said that funding support to local community centres and organisations providing induction for new migrants needs to be strengthened, and many of these groups are currently struggling, and that is also something that we would endorse and I think would be better for the long-term well-being of our communities as well as the migrants, and ensures that New Zealand gets the most out of the involvement of the people in our community, and then we can encourage them to stay and contribute rather than have a terrible experience and leave and go somewhere else and add their labour to those communities. And also, possibly the most importantly, the Union Network of Migrants has raised concerns that if a migrant worker speaks out about abuse and leave those exploitative jobs, they will lose their work visa that's tied to that job. So that this is clearly a very significant barrier for those workers to be able to get justice and be treated fairly. A visitor's visa doesn't give them the ability to earn, and this risks workers going underground into unlawful work in order to survive. So what the union has been recommending is an open visa should be given, allowing affected migrants to find alternative work while their case is being heard. It seems to me that that's the least that we could do after, if we haven't managed to protect them from that exploitation in the first place. So this is clearly a very important area of work, and we'd like to offer our thanks to the Minister for bringing it to this House and look forward to properly discussing it and working out the best solution for our communities and those workers. I would just like to mention briefly some of the other aspects of this bill that we seem not necessarily to be an essential part of that policy platform, and that do raise concerns for us. That this bill gives immigration officers power to undertake personal and property searches, including employees' premises, but not specifically related to that aspect of their work at all. And we would need to see evidence that immigration officers are unable to do their job properly at the moment without these extended powers. And we have not seen evidence of that. And we are very reluctant to see what is traditionally the work of our police force extended into any more than it absolutely has to be. We also have concerns around privacy in the relation to the extension of the collection of biometric information to be gathered for identity management, and there's some lack of clarity around the purpose of that and the extent of that we would be keen to investigate. And we are very clearly in opposition to what has been put as an aspect in this bill is reiterating that requests for personal information under the Privacy Act will not apply to reasons for decisions made using absolute discretion. We oppose that policy. We believe that people have a right to information and that the best systems are challengeable systems, and we will encourage the government to take that approach. Thanks to the Minister.
Chris Ockenvold.
I support this bill.
Right.